we are to learn anything from the dark experience, we cannot go back to the failed policies that with the worst housing and homelessness crisis, health services, with under-resourced, under-capacity public services in water, in energy, in many, with a addressing climate change. The resources that we need to tackle. We think that the inescapable society is faced with the government were forced to abandon policies of austerity, based policies, and to embark on of state intervention in their incomes and protect our society. And we think we have to move forward after the pandemic. While we hopefully are edging our way out of the COVID emergency that created, we are still faced with multiple emergencies and crises. We have a housing emergency, we have a healthcare emergency, we have a climate and biodiversity emergency, chronic deficiencies in a whole range of public services and infrastructure, and we have gross inequality across our society. So our budget is about giving a permanent dividend to working people, hundreds of thousands of through the pandemic, without whom we would not have been able to meet the challenge of the pandemic, workers in health, in transport, cleaners, teachers, retail workers, and many, many others, often who pay and poor conditions of employment, were absolutely critical to sustain through the COVID reward and dividend of improvements in their pay, their conditions, but also in terms of housing crisis and providing public and affordable, providing a single tier national health service that is free, providing a green public transport system, making education all levels and removing all primary, secondary or third level education, but in a way that ensures for working people. We reject that we do not have the resources and wealth in our society to actually take the sort of radical measures that are contained in our budget submission. And I mean, just to say, it is a radical budget. We are proposing, in addition, a 23 billion euro of additional revenue to be raised through taxes on profits, on wealth, and on the incomes of the very wealthy, in order to fund and in excess of 20 billion euro additional investment in housing, in health, in education, in childcare, in tackling the climate crisis, in improving the incomes and welfare provisions for our citizens, and indeed improving the lot of our pensioners. And as we identify in our budget submission, there is more than enough wealth in our society to do that, but that wealth is overwhelmingly concentrated in the hands of a tiny number of very wealthy people and staggeringly profitable corporations who have seen an absolutely startling increase in their wealth and in their incomes during the COVID pandemic, while the vast majority of working people have actually suffered very significant hardship, loss of employment, and loss of income. And I really think it is quite staggering. The corporate profits in this country, as we demonstrate, have gone from 75 billion in 2012 to 203 billion last year. That's a 127% increase in corporate profits. Household wealth in this country has reached a staggering 883 billion euro in household wealth, but with 5% of the population having 331 billion euro between them, an average income of about 3.8 million. And you will also see a pretty dramatic rise in the incomes of those earning in excess of €250,000 euro a year. So there are huge wealth and resources concentrated at the top of our society, which, if they were taxed fairly, could fund the sort of radical transformation that we need to address the housing crisis, the health crisis, to invest in education, public transport, and in a just transition for workers in terms of climate change. To mention a few of the sort of highlights, but obviously I'm sure the public service broadcaster may have their own questions on this in the Irish Times. A few. We propose in housing to deliver a minimum of to 29,000 public and affordable houses in 2022 on public land, and by using the remaining assets and resources. We also propose retrofits of homes to massively scale up the retrofit program, which so far has been abysmal. In terms of a lasting pandemic dividend for workers, we're proposing to increase the minimum wage to many of our frontline and essential for free since the austerity, abolish incomes less than €90,000 a year, and restore the pension age to €65 a week. In education, we're proposing to abolish and postgrad fees, tuition and registration for mature students. In primary and secondary, we're proposing voluntary contribution and other pupil-teacher ratio down to 1 to 15, reasonable sized classrooms rather than the overcrowded ones that we currently have. In the health service, we are proposing to move immediately to a single tier national health service, which is free at GP care, free primary care, no accident and emergency charges. Of our health service by recruiting 4,000 additional consultants, and also to dramatically increase the investment organizations' recommended levels of mental health spending to be able to meet the commitments that we have under the we are talking about capacity of our health service, particularly by investing bus and for by a very significant margin. There are many other things. We're proposing to childcare service for all. We are dramatic increase in the in retrofit as I mentioned. I won't go through absolutely all of the expenditure to fund all of this, and it's important to note the government, before COVID, we considered proposed budgeted adjustments of 20 billion or more, and we now that in response to COVID, the government were actually to increase expenditure and make an adjustment of 4 billion. Proving that it was possible. The economy didn't fall apart. In fact, that helped the economy continue to grow while supporting people through a public emergency. So in saying that we think it's possible additional more than 20 billion euro through additional big corporations, the very wealthy, the very wealthy. Some of the measures we propose to do that from the corporations. Corporation profits, as I said, have increased by 150%, but they are paying only 5.8 who earn half as much, 130 billion euro in tax, more than twice what the corporate. So, in other words, the average worker is paying 4. We intend to double the tax take corporations to avoid their tax. If the government doesn't act tax on property tax and replace it with a multiple property tax, when properties more than 10 properties, which is a very made enormous fortunes from. We're also proposing to increase the PSRI, bringing the pension age back to 65. We're also proposing to introduce plans on the higher earners who are earning €1,000 a year, and finally to introduce a wealth on the 5% of the population who have, on average, between them about €3.8 million each. We're proposing levy on all of their wealth euro. So that will be a tax. The very, very wealthiest in our society. Significant wealth when you consider that group alone have 300 between them. That's between 85,000. Short, we think, yeah, that cannot go back to the old failed policy, housing and health crisis that had. We have to move forward by redistributing. Give us the affordable and public housing we need and ensure that working people in this country are keeping our society going. There you go. Play all that. So it's a public service broadcaster or the to ask. Fire.
I just noticed, I think it's 22 billion extra in spend has kind of warned against covering new taxes, saying increasing taxes would actually hamper economic. I mean, do you think your plan in that sense might put economics in front of what they're saying?
No, the very opposite. To tax working people, you would very much hamper. And I think we saw during COVID that actually supporting the income of ordinary workers helped sustain. But the problem is that huge amounts of the surplus wealth that has been generated in this country is not being reinvested. Improve strategically investing in the areas of the economy we invest in, and that is actually an impediment to growth and to, if you like, a sustainable economic future. That bottleneck by actually ensuring that the huge resources that do exist are actually needed to deliver the infrastructure we urgently need in water and in energy, the quality healthcare system that we need, and to ensure fairness in the distribution of the economic growth.
I think when there was this big expansion of the state at the start of the pandemic, some people thought that this might be a permanent feature, would certainly change, how budgets were done. Might increase the public appetite for this sort of proposals.
I think undoubtedly that to essentially nationalise the health service in order to meet the challenge of the pandemic. But as soon as the pandemic is over, the government have reverted to a two-tier system, and suddenly we find ourselves with with the pre-COVID crisis of 1 million people on waiting lists, A&E overcrowded again. Public health emergencies develop very quickly in a whole range of other areas. So it is logical that we would use the capacity that exists in a single tier health system. We have the capacity. The problem is that much of the health capacity we need to address the crisis is in private hands. Learn the lessons of the COVID pandemic in that sense, and I think people would very much welcome if we could address the dire crisis that currently exists in the health service, with people waiting in pain for vital operations and procedures for years on waiting lists. There you go. Totally convinced you.